Fear was a language the Vortex spoke fluently. They had perfected it across 47 conquered worlds, turning terror into an art form that bent entire civilizations to their will. The massive reptilian warriors understood that true dominance came not from destroying enemies but from making them destroy themselves through pure dread. Rask pressed his clawed hand against the viewport of the hunting vessel Bloodfang, watching the blue marble of an unnamed planet spin slowly below. Intelligence reports suggested 2 dominant species inhabited this world: bipedal primates and various smaller mammals. Both appeared primitive, lacking the advanced technology that might pose even minor resistance to Vorthak superiority. The War Council had designated this conquest as a training exercise for younger warriors. Rask found himself almost insulted by the assignment. At 9 feet tall, with scales harder than most metals and acidic saliva that could melt through steel, he had personally broken the spirits of species far more formidable than these soft-skinned mammals. Sub-Commander Grix reports the surface scans complete, announced his communications officer, a younger Vorthak whose claws still gleamed with fresh polish. The primates show signs of basic tool use and crude shelters. The smaller mammals appear to be pets or livestock. No energy signatures suggesting advanced weapons. Rask's throat sacs inflated with satisfaction. 47 worlds had taught him that the first moments of contact determined everything. Show overwhelming force, demonstrate absolute superiority, and most species would surrender before the first battle began. The survivors would spend generations telling stories of Vorthak might, ensuring future compliance through inherited terror. "Begin the approach," he commanded. "Full intimidation protocol. I want every sensor on that planet to register our presence." The Bloodfang descended through the atmosphere like a falling mountain of black metal and glowing energy conduits. Its hull bore the scars and trophies of dozens of conquered worlds, fragments of alien hulls welded into grotesque artwork that told the story of Vorthak dominance. The ship's bioluminescent threat displays pulsed in patterns designed to trigger primal fear responses in mammalian nervous systems. As they broke through the cloud layer, Rask activated the terror broadcast system. His voice, amplified and distorted through harmonic frequencies that could shatter glass and stop hearts, boomed across the planet's surface in the species' most common languages. The ship's translation matrix had already analyzed their primitive communication methods. "Creatures of the blue world, you now face the Vorthak Empire. We are evolution's perfect predators, the apex of all apex species. Your civilizations exist at our mercy. Surrender now, and some of you may survive to serve. Resist, and your species will become nothing more than cautionary tales whispered by the few survivors we choose to spare." The broadcast echoed across continents, carried by radio waves and electromagnetic pulses that ensured every creature with primitive communication technology would hear their doom announced. Rask had delivered variations of this speech 47 times. Sometimes species tried to negotiate. Sometimes they attempted futile military resistance. But they always broke within days, their leaders begging for mercy while offering their own people as tribute. What came back through the communication array this time made Rask's secondary hearts skip several beats. "Come and try it." The voice was calm, almost conversational. It carried no trace of the fear that should have been flooding every nerve in the speaker's primitive brain. Worse, there was something in those 4 simple words that Rask had never encountered in all his years. Of conquest, complete dismissal of Vorthak superiority. "Repeat that transmission," Rask ordered, certain his officers had made an error. "Sir, we've verified the source." The response came from the planet's surface, approximately 12,000 meters below our current position. The speaker appears to be one of the bipedal primates. Rask stared at the communication display, his predatory instincts struggling to process this impossibility. No species had ever responded to Vorthak terror broadcasts with anything approaching defiance. The carefully modulated frequencies alone should have triggered involuntary fear responses in any mammalian nervous system. "Perhaps they don't understand the translation," suggested the communications officer. "Their language processing seems crude." "No," Rask growled, his claws scraping against the metal of his command throne. "They understood perfectly. Send another broadcast. Increase the harmonic fear frequencies to maximum intensity. The second broadcast contained detailed descriptions of what the Vorthak would do to the planet's population. Rask described the systematic hunting of their young, the consumption of their leaders while their families watched, the centuries of servitude that awaited survivors. He painted pictures of devastation so complete that most species surrendered rather than risk even the possibility of such a fate. The response came back even faster this time, and now there was something that might have been amusement in the voice. You guys done talking, or should we put on some coffee while we wait for the actual threats to show up? Sub-Commander Grix, a veteran of 12 conquests, turned from his weapons console with confusion written across his scarred features. Sir, perhaps this species lacks the neural structures necessary to process fear appropriately. Some primitive creatures have deficient threat recognition systems. Rask considered this possibility. They had encountered species with unusual neurological structures before, creatures so simple they couldn't understand they were being threatened. But those species had also been too primitive for language, tools, or organized resistance. These creatures clearly possessed advanced cognitive abilities, yet seemed completely immune to psychological warfare that had never failed. Prepare landing parties, he finally commanded. If they cannot understand fear through words, we will teach them through demonstration. Select our most intimidating warriors. I want them to see exactly what they're defying. The Bloodfangs, hangar bays opened like the jaws of some cosmic predator, disgorging smaller attack craft toward the planet's surface. Each vessel carried a full squad of Vorthak warriors in their most terrifying battle armor, weapons charged and ready to provide the educational experience these mammals clearly needed. As the attack craft descended toward the coordinates of the transmission source, Rask allowed himself a moment of anticipation. Soon these creatures would learn why 47 civilizations had chosen submission over resistance. They would understand that some predators were so far beyond their comprehension that defiance itself was a form of madness. The last transmission from the surface came through just as his warriors' ships touched down in what appeared to be some kind of research facility, surrounded by sparse vegetation and scattered equipment. Hope you brought something stronger than those fancy ships, boys. Down here we measure predators by different standards. Rask's throat sacs deflated as an unfamiliar emotion crept through his consciousness. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he found himself wondering if perhaps the Vorthak had finally encountered something they didn't understand. Below, his warriors were about to learn that evolution's true apex predators often came in the most unexpected forms. Red dirt kicked up in small clouds as the Vorthak assault craft settled onto the Australian outback, with a mechanical whine that sent nearby wildlife scrambling for cover. The ship's landing thrusters scorched the sparse grass around the research station, leaving patterns of burned earth that were meant to demonstrate the destructive power these aliens commanded. Dr. Alex Reed didn't move from his position on the small camp chair outside his research trailer. He continued typing notes on his tablet while a 25-pound honey badger sprawled in the shade beside him, apparently sleeping despite the earth-shaking arrival of an alien invasion force. Buster had been with Alex for 5 years now, ever since the researcher found him as an orphaned kit during a field study. Most people thought keeping a honey badger as a companion was insane, but Alex had learned that Buster's reputation for fearlessness wasn't exaggeration. It was simply how his species approached existence. Nothing worried Buster. Not snakes, not lions, not vehicles, not thunderstorms, and apparently not alien spacecraft either. The assault craft's main hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss, releasing a cloud of pressurized atmosphere that smelled like sulfur and copper. 3 Vorthak warriors emerged, their massive forms casting long shadows across the research camp. Their armor gleamed with technological sophistication, covered in sensors and weapon systems that could level buildings. Warrior Grix, the squad leader, stood nearly 10 feet tall in his battlesuit. His natural reptilian features were enhanced by tactical displays and amplification systems that made his voice boom like thunder. Behind him, 2 more warriors took flanking positions, their weapons trained on the seemingly oblivious human. Alex looked up from his tablet with the same expression he might use when noticing a new bird species. Afternoon. You folks the ones who've been making all that noise up there? Grix's throat sacs inflated to full intimidation display, a biological response that had sent countless species fleeing in terror. His acidic saliva began forming in preparation for the demonstration that would show these mammals exactly what they faced. Human creature, you will witness the power of the Vorthak Empire. We are evolution's apex predators, and your species exists now only because we permit it. Observe as I demonstrate our superiority by destroying your companion animal. Buster opened one eye, assessed the 3 9-foot armored aliens pointing weapons at him, and apparently decided they weren't interesting enough to interrupt his nap. He closed his eye again. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Alex said mildly, not looking up from his notes. Buster doesn't like sudden movements toward either of us. Fair warning. Grix's mandibles clicked with what might have been laughter. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered a species so delusional about their place in the natural order. These mammals seemed to believe their tiny companion could somehow threaten superior alien technology and millions of years, a predatory evolution. Your pathetic creature will serve as an example of Vorthak dominance, Grix declared, raising his primary weapon toward the honey badger. Watch as your companion dies, and understand that resistance is... Buster opened both eyes. What happened? Next violated every principle of predatory behavior that Grix understood. Instead of fleeing or cowering, the small mammal rose to his feet with casual interest, tilted his head slightly as if calculating angles, and launched himself directly at the center of Grix's chest armor. 25 pounds of honey badger hit 9 feet of armored alien warrior with the impact of a furry missile. Grix staggered backward, more from surprise than force, but Buster was already climbing, claws finding purchase points between armor plates with the efficiency of a creature that had evolved to dismantle things much larger than himself. Warning. Shots, warning shots. Grix bellowed to his warriors, but Buster had already reached the Vorthak's throat, where the armor provided less coverage for mobility. The honey badger's jaws locked onto the alien's neck with a grip that millions of years of evolution had designed never to let go. Grix thrashed wildly, his claws raking across Buster's hide and drawing blood, but the honey badger seemed to interpret the wounds as minor inconveniences rather than reasons to retreat. Acidic saliva began streaming from Grix's panic response, burning Buster's face and shoulders, yet the animal's grip only tightened. The 2 backup warriors raised their weapons, but found themselves unable to fire without hitting their squad leader. They had trained for countless combat scenarios, but none of their tactical programs covered situations where the enemy was small enough to use their own leader as a shield while systematically attempting to remove his head. Get it off! Get it off! Grix's amplified voice cracked with a tone his species rarely produced. Genuine panic. He rolled on the ground, trying to dislodge his attacker, but Buster rode the movements like a professional, adjusting his grip and continuing his methodical work. Alex stood up slowly, brushing dust off his clothes. He walked over to where the mighty Vorthak warrior was being systematically dismantled by 25 pounds of unconcerned mammal and looked down at the remaining 2 aliens. Your friend there is learning something important about Earth's ecosystem, Alex said conversationally. See, Buster's species didn't become survivors by being reasonable about threats. They became survivors by being completely unreasonable about everything. Lions, hyenas, cobras, doesn't matter to him. If you threaten his territory or his family, he'll fight until one of you is dead, and he's surprisingly difficult to kill. One of the remaining warriors aimed his weapon at Alex, but the human just shook his head. I wouldn't. Buster considers me family. You hurt me, and he'll finish with your friend there and move on to both of you, and unlike your buddy, you won't have armor to slow him down. Grix's struggles were becoming weaker. The honey badger had found something vital in the alien's neck area and was working with the focused determination of a creature that had evolved to disassemble prey much larger than himself. Blood and alien fluids were mixing with Buster's saliva, creating a gruesome paste that seemed to only encourage the animal's efforts. This is impossible, one of the warriors said, his weapon wavering. No creature that size should be able to defeat a Vorthak warrior. Your species' data indicated you were prey animals. Alex sat back down in his chair and picked up his tablet. That's your first mistake right there. You assumed prey and predator work the same way on every planet. Down here, we've got creatures that became apex species not by being the biggest or strongest, but by being too stupid to know when they should give up. Buster had gone quiet, no longer thrashing but still firmly attached to Grix's neck. The Vorthak warrior's movements had become sluggish, his breathing shallow. His armor's medical systems were beeping frantically, trying to compensate for whatever critical systems the honey badger had compromised. "Call your ship," Alex suggested, looking at the two remaining aliens. "Tell them you've encountered Earth's actual apex predators. Explain that size isn't everything and that sometimes evolution produces creatures that are dangerous specifically because they don't know they're supposed to be afraid." The warriors looked at their fallen leader, at the small blood-covered mammal still clamped to his throat, and at the human who seemed to consider this all perfectly normal. "What are you?" one of them finally asked. Alex smiled and reached over to scratch behind Buster's ears. The honey badger released his grip on the now unconscious Vorthak warrior and wandered back to his shady spot, licking alien blood off his muzzle with satisfaction. "We're the species that figured out how to make friends with things like him," Alex said, "and that makes us the most dangerous predators this planet ever produced." Emergency alerts flashed across every screen aboard the Bloodfang as reports flooded in from Vorthak forces across the planet. What should have been routine intimidation missions were turning into disasters that defied all tactical logic and biological understanding. Rask stared at the incoming data streams, his secondary hearts racing as each report painted the same impossible picture. Ground Team 7 had encountered a human child accompanied by a creature called a goose, a simple bird that somehow managed to break two warriors' arms while making sounds so horrifying that veteran soldiers fled rather than continue the queue. Engagement. Team 12 reported being driven back by a pack of dogs working in perfect coordination with human handlers who seemed to anticipate every Vorthak tactical movement. But it was the footage from Grix's squad that truly shattered Rask's understanding of predatory hierarchy. "Play it again," he commanded, watching for the 5th time as 25 pounds of earth mammal systematically dismantled one of his best warriors. The small creature's complete dismissal of superior size, advanced technology, and overwhelming odds violated every principle of survival behavior that Rask understood. "Sir, we're receiving similar reports from all landing zones," his intelligence officer reported, mandibles clicking nervously. "The humans appear to have formed partnerships with various species that demonstrate impossible aggression levels. Our psychological warfare protocols are completely ineffective." Rask's claws drummed against his command throne as he processed this intelligence. The Vorthak Empire had conquered 47 worlds by understanding one simple truth. All creatures feared death, and that fear could be weaponized. Show superior force, demonstrate the consequences of resistance, and survival instincts would do the rest. But these Earth creatures seemed to operate under completely different rules. The small mammals didn't flee when threatened. They attacked. The humans didn't surrender when faced with superior firepower. They adapted their tactics. Most disturbing of all, the two species worked together with a coordination that suggested deep evolutionary partnerships. "Bring up the biological analysis of the human called Alex Reed," Rask ordered. The display showed anatomical details that made the situation even more confusing. Humans were physically unremarkable compared to most sentient species the Vorthak had encountered. They lacked natural armor, possessed no venomous capabilities, and their muscle density was mediocre at best. Yet somehow this particular specimen had remained completely calm while his companion tore apart a Vorthak warrior. "Look at their evolutionary history," suggested Subcommander Grix, still smarting from his squad's humiliation. "Perhaps they've hidden their true capabilities." The data told a different story entirely. Humans had evolved not as apex predators in the traditional sense, but as persistence hunters and tool users. They were endurance specialists who had learned to outlast prey rather than overpower it. More interesting, they showed unique neurological adaptations for forming cooperative bonds with other species. They're pack hunters, Rask realized, pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a disturbing picture, but their pack includes species from across their entire ecosystem. The analysis showed domestication patterns spanning thousands of Earth years. Humans had systematically identified the most useful traits in other species and formed partnerships that enhanced both groups' survival chances. Dogs provided tracking and loyalty. Horses provided speed and strength. Various birds provided reconnaissance and pest control. But the honey badger partnership was different. According to the data, honey badgers were among Earth's most fearless species, genetically programmed to attack anything that threatened their territory regardless of size or apparent danger. Humans hadn't domesticated them so much as formed alliances with creatures that shared their own stubborn refusal to accept reasonable limitations. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," the communications officer announced. "It's the human read again." Alex's calm voice filled the bridge, transmitted from the research station where Grix's squad had met their humiliating defeat. "Hello again, folks up there. Hope you're getting a good look at the footage from your landing parties. Thought you might want some context before you send down any more soldiers." Rask activated the response system, his voice carefully modulated to project maximum authority. "Human creature, you have witnessed only a fraction of Vorthak capabilities. Surrender now, and your death will be swift." "See, that's where you're misunderstanding the situation," Alex replied, and there was something in his tone that made Rask's predatory instincts twitch with unease. "You're thinking like apex predators from your neck of the galaxy. Big, scary, lots of teeth and claws. But down here, we learned a long time ago that being the scariest thing in the room isn't always the best survival strategy." The transmission included video feed from cameras around the research station. Rask could see the human sitting in his chair, the honey badger sprawled nearby, and what appeared to be additional creatures moving in the shadows beyond the main facility. "Your species became apex predators through intimidation," Alex continued. "Ours became apex predators through partnership. We didn't need to evolve claws when we could befriend creatures that had better claws. We didn't need armor when we could ally with creatures that didn't care about getting hurt. We didn't need to be fearless when we could make friends with creatures that were too stupid to understand fear in the first place." More movement in the video feed. Rask counted at least a dozen different species gathered around the research station. Some he recognized as the dogs that had caused problems for other squads, others that appeared to be various Earth predators that should have been competing with each other for territory. "The thing is," Alex said, standing up and walking toward the camera, "word's been getting around about your visit, and we've been making some calls. Turns out a lot of people on this planet have similar partnerships with creatures that don't much like bullies." The video feed switched to aerial views from around the planet. Vorthak landing sites were surrounded by growing crowds of humans, accompanied by impossible varieties of animal companions. Large predators that should have been solitary were working in coordinated groups. Small creatures that should have fled from alien technology were instead investigating it with obvious hostile intent. "You wanted to meet Earth's apex predators," Alex said, his voice still conversational but carrying an undertone that made even Rask's experienced threat assessment systems register warnings. "Well, congratulations. You're looking at them. We're not the biggest or the strongest or the scariest. We're just the species that learned how to make friends with everything else that lives here." Buster wandered into the camera's view, yawned widely, and began casually sharpening his claws on what appeared to be a piece of Vorthak armor left behind from the earlier encounter. "Here's the thing about honey badgers," Alex continued, scratching the animal behind the ears. "They don't hunt for dominance or territory like normal predators. They fight because they're too ornery to do anything else. And they don't stop fighting until the threat goes away or they die trying. Now imagine that attitude backed up by human strategic thinking and tool use." The implications hit Rask like a physical blow. The Vorthak had built their empire on the assumption that superior force would always triumph over inferior species. But they had never encountered a species that could weaponize fearlessness itself, backed by intelligence sophisticated enough to coordinate multi-species tactical responses. "So here's our counteroffer," Alex said, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held no trace of the fear that should have been flooding his primitive nervous system. "You can leave our system now, while you still have enough ships to make the journey home. Or you can stick around and find out what happens when Earth's actual apex predators decide they don't like visitors." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Bloodfang in silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of warning alerts from ground teams requesting immediate extraction. For the first time in his career, Rask found himself contemplating the previously impossible concept of tactical withdrawal. These creatures had somehow turned the basic rules of predator-prey relationships upside down, creating partnerships that multiplied their effective capabilities beyond any reasonable calculation. The honey badger in the video had yawned at them, actually yawned as if the arrival of a superior alien species was too boring to maintain his attention. Rask was beginning to understand that the Vorthak Empire had finally encountered something genuinely terrifying. Predators who were dangerous, not because they were reasonable, but because they were completely, absolutely, and cheerfully insane. Pride was a weakness Rask had never acknowledged until it drove him to make the worst tactical decision of his military career. Instead of accepting the growing evidence that these Earth creatures represented something beyond Vorthak understanding, he chose to interpret their resistance as a personal insult that demanded overwhelming response. The research station sat in a valley surrounded by red rocks and sparse vegetation, looking deceptively peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. 50 Vorthak warriors in full battle armor had taken positions around the facility, their weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto every structure. This time, there would be no surprises, no impossible small mammals catching elite soldiers off guard. Rask himself had joined the assault force, determined to personally demonstrate Vorthak superiority to these delusional creatures. His personal armor incorporated technology from dozens of conquered worlds, and his weapon systems could level entire city blocks. Whatever tricks these mammals possessed, they would prove insufficient against properly applied overwhelming force. "Begin the demonstration," he commanded through his suit's amplification system. "I want every structure reduced to molecular debris. Show them what happens when inferior species challenge their betters." The first energy blast vaporized Alex's research trailer in a flash of superheated plasma. The second destroyed his equipment shed. The third turned his vehicle into expanding gas and scattered metal fragments. Rask allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the primitive structures disappear. That satisfaction lasted exactly until he noticed that the human and his companion were nowhere to be found. "Movement detected," reported his tactical officer. "Multiple signatures approaching from all directions. Species identification uncertain." The first wolf appeared on a ridgeline about 300 meters north of the station, its gray form outlined against the red rocks. Then another appeared, and another, until an entire pack was visible. But wolves were solitary species according to their intelligence reports. These creatures shouldn't have been working together in such numbers. "Aerial contact," announced another warrior, his voice tight with confusion. "Large birds approaching from the east. Flight patterns suggest coordinated hunting behavior." Rask looked up to see shapes circling overhead. Eagles, hawks, and other raptors that should have been territorial enemies, but were instead moving with obvious tactical coordination. Their cries echoed off the rock formations, creating an acoustic environment that made his threat assessment systems register increasing danger levels. "Sir, ground-level movement detected on all perimeters," his sensor operator reported. "Signatures are small but numerous. Estimated count exceeds 100 individual creatures." Through his armor's enhanced vision, Rask began to identify the approaching forces. Badgers, wolverines, foxes, and dozens of other species that should have been fleeing from the energy weapons discharge were instead converging on the Vorthak position. Behind them, barely visible in the rocky terrain, human figures moved with the practiced stealth of creatures that had learned to hunt alongside natural predators. "This is impossible," muttered Sub-Commander Grix, his own sensors painting the same tactical picture. "These species don't cooperate in nature. They compete for resources and territory." The answer came from speakers hidden throughout the valley, as Alex's voice echoed off the rock walls. "That's where you're wrong again, boys. These species learn to cooperate because we taught them something your kind never figured out. Sometimes the best way to survive isn't to fight each other, but to fight together against something that threatens everyone." A honey badger emerged from behind a boulder about 50 meters away, moving with the casual confidence of a creature that had never met a threat it couldn't handle. But this wasn't Buster. This was a larger animal, scarred from years of combat, and its eyes held the kind of focused intelligence that came from extensive tactical training. Meet Buster's cousin Lucy, Alex's voice continued. She's been working with our military for 3 years now. Turns out honey badgers are excellent at what you might call aggressive reconnaissance. Lucy, show our guests what you've learned. Lucy charged directly at the nearest Vorthak warrior, but instead of the wild attack they expected, her movement was coordinated with the wolves appearing on the ridgelines. As the warrior aimed his weapon at the honey badger, a gray shape dropped from above, one of the circling raptors diving with talons extended toward his helmet's sensor array. The warrior's shot went wide as razor-sharp claws raked across his targeting systems. Lucy reached his position and immediately went for the joints in his armor. Areas that 3 years of military training had taught her were vulnerable points in most technological defensive systems. Formation Attack Pattern 7, came a human voice from somewhere in the rocks, and suddenly the entire valley erupted into coordinated chaos. Wolves flowed down the slopes like gray water, but instead of attacking randomly, they moved in precise, tactical formations that cut off retreat routes and created crossfire zones. The aerial raptors dove in coordinated strikes that targeted sensor arrays and communication equipment. Smaller mammals emerged from concealment to attack specific weak points in Vorthak armor, while larger predators provided covering attacks. But it was the human participation that transformed animal aggression into something approaching military precision. Voices called out targeting information, tactical updates, and coordination commands in a language that somehow bridged species barriers. The animals responded to human direction while the humans provided strategic oversight that multiplied their natural hunting abilities. Impossible, Rask roared, his own weapon sweeping across the valley as he tried to target the human commanders, directing this madness. Animals cannot learn military tactics. You're right, Alex's voice replied, now coming from a different direction entirely. Animals can't learn military tactics, but they can learn to trust humans who understand military tactics. And humans can learn to fight alongside creatures that don't know the meaning of retreat. A wolverine hit Rask's position with the impact of a furry missile, its claws finding purchase points between his armor plates with surgical precision. Unlike the wild animals his intelligence reports had described, this creature's attack followed clearly defined tactical principles: disable sensors first, then mobility systems, then life support. Rask threw his full weight backward, trying to dislodge his attacker, but the wolverine rode the movement with practiced ease while continuing its systematic dismantling of his equipment. Worse, its attack was being supported by covering fire from human positions that anticipated his defensive movements and adjusted accordingly. Fall back, he commanded, but his warriors were discovering that retreat was impossible when faced with predators that could move faster than armor and coordinators that could predict tactical responses. The wolves had cut off the primary escape routes. The aerial forces controlled the high ground. The smaller mammals had disabled most of their heavy weapons. And through it all, human voices provided the strategic coordination that turned natural hunting instincts into something resembling professional military operations. "Sir, we're losing cohesion," reported his tactical officer, his voice strained as he fought off what appeared to be a fox that had somehow learned to target communication equipment specifically. "Request immediate extraction." The extraction. Ships arrived to find 50 of the Vorthak Empire's elite warriors in full retreat from creatures that their intelligence had classified as harmless fauna. The footage would later become mandatory viewing in Vorthak military academies, though no instructor was ever able to adequately explain how evolution could produce partnerships between species that violated every known principle of interspecies competition. As the last Vorthak warrior was pulled aboard an extraction craft, Alex's voice followed them into the sky. "Tell your friends up there we're just getting started. This is what happens when you threaten a planet where every predator learned to be part of the same pack." Rask stared out at the planet's surface as they climbed toward orbit, watching coordination patterns that transformed Earth's entire ecosystem into a single, unified hunting group. For the first time in his career, He understood what it meant to be prey. Silence had replaced the usual activity aboard the Bloodfang as Rask contemplated the impossible choice before him. His warriors sat at their stations with the hollow expressions of predators who had discovered they were prey. The ship's medical bay overflowed with soldiers whose injuries defied tactical explanation. Claw marks from creatures too small to damage advanced armor, bite wounds that had somehow penetrated energy shields, and psychological trauma from encounters with animals that simply refused to acknowledge they should be afraid. 3 hours had passed since the last extraction, and no Vorthak warrior remained on the planet's surface. The mighty invasion force that had conquered 47 worlds now hung in orbit above a single blue planet, unable to complete their mission against creatures that weighed less than their smallest weapon systems. "Sir, incoming transmission from the War Council," announced his communications officer, mandibles clicking with nervous energy. "They're demanding a status report." Rask considered the absurdity of trying to explain their situation to the Empire's leadership. How could he describe being defeated by partnerships between species that evolution should have kept separate? How could he admit that creatures without advanced technology had outmaneuvered forces equipped with weapons that could sterilize continents? "Tell them we're conducting extended reconnaissance," he finally replied. "Inform them that this planet's defensive capabilities require further analysis before we can recommend tactical approaches." It was a coward's answer, but Rask had discovered that facing impossible odds had a way of redefining courage. The alternative was admitting that the Vorthak Empire had finally encountered something that made their concept of predatory dominance look primitive by comparison. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the surface," the communications officer reported. "It's the human read again." Alex's voice filled the bridge with the same calm confidence that had characterized all his previous communications. "Good evening, Captain Rask. Hope your medical team is taking good care of your soldiers. Our people wanted me to pass along their professional assessment of your tactical capabilities." The transmission included video feed from the planet's surface. Instead of showing the devastation that should have resulted from Vorthak weapons, fire, the images revealed repair work already underway at the research station. Humans and animals worked side by side to rebuild structures, clear debris, and restore equipment with the efficient coordination of a species that had dealt with natural disasters for millennia. "Your warriors are impressive fighters," Alex continued, and Rask could hear something in his tone that might have been respect. "Good equipment, excellent training, solid tactical doctrine. Problem is, they're designed to fight other warriors using similar approaches. Down here, we've been dealing with predators that don't follow any doctrine at all." Buster wandered into the camera's view, apparently recovered from his earlier encounter and showing no sign that meeting alien technology had made any lasting impression on his worldview. The honey badger examined a piece of Vorthak armor left behind during the retreat, sniffed it with mild interest, and then used it to scratch an itch before wandering off. "See? Your species became apex predators by being better at being predators than anything else in your environment," Alex said, settling into his familiar camp chair. "Our species became apex predators by convincing everything else in our environment to be predators with us instead of against us." The video feed switched to global surveillance footage that made Rask's threat assessment system sound continuous alarms. Every major population center on the planet showed similar scenes. Humans working alongside impossible varieties of animal partners in coordination patterns that suggested planet-wide tactical integration. "We've been talking with our governments," Alex continued. "Turns out when you threaten one human settlement, you're actually threatening all of them. And when you threaten all humans, you're threatening every species that's decided we're worth keeping around. That's a lot of very angry predators, Captain." Rask found himself calculating the tactical implications of what he was seeing. These weren't separate species competing for resources. They were components of a single ecological machine that had learned to function as a unified defensive system. The Vorthak Empire had built its power on the principle of divide and conquer, but these creatures had already conquered division itself. "You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this," Alex said, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held no trace of fear or hatred. "Truth is, we don't want to fight you. Fighting is expensive, people get hurt, and there's always a chance someone might get lucky with a weapon that could do real damage to our planet. The view switched to show Alex standing beside what appeared to be a communications array that definitely hadn't existed during the initial invasion. Human ingenuity combined with whatever materials they had salvaged from Vorthak equipment had produced technology that registered as advanced even on the Bloodfang's sophisticated sensors. "So here's what we're proposing," Alex continued. "You tell your empire that Earth is under the protection of species that don't negotiate, don't surrender, and don't stop fighting until threats go away. In exchange, we'll make sure this little encounter stays between us. No need for your leadership to know that the mighty Vorthak Empire got outfought by a bunch of mammals with attitude problems." Rask stared at the communication display, processing an offer that violated every principle of conquest warfare he understood. These creatures were offering him a way to retreat with dignity intact rather than demanding surrender or tribute. It was a form of mercy, but mercy backed by demonstrated capability to inflict continued defeat. "Think about it, Captain," Alex said. And now his voice carried the weight of someone who had spent years working with creatures that could kill him without effort, but chose partnership instead. "Your empire is built on fear, and that works fine against species that evolved to be reasonable about survival. But down here, we're partnered with creatures that think survival is less important than loyalty. You can't intimidate friendship, and you can't conquer stubborn." Buster reappeared in the video, this time carrying what appeared to be a Vorthak energy cell in his mouth. He dropped it at Alex's feet like a cat bringing a gift, then looked up at the camera with an expression that somehow conveyed complete indifference to the concept of superior alien technology. "We've got thousands of species on this planet," Alex concluded. "Some of them are smart, some of them are strong, some of them are fast. But all of them are too ornery to quit when something threatens their home. And all of them consider humans family now." The transmission ended with an image that would haunt Rask's dreams for years to come. A honey badger casually grooming itself while sitting on a pile of advanced alien armor, completely unconcerned about having just redefined the balance of power in this section of the galaxy. Rask looked around the bridge at his officers, seeing his own realization reflected in their expressions. The Vorthak Empire had built its dominance on being evolution's most perfect predators, but they had finally encountered evolution's most perfect adaptation, creatures that had learned to make every other predator on their planet into allies. "Helm, set course for home," he commanded quietly. "Sir, what should I log as the reason for mission termination?" Rask considered the question that would define the rest of his career. How could he explain that they had discovered something more dangerous than superior weapons or advanced technology? How could he describe the terror of facing creatures that were dangerous specifically because they were too loyal and too stubborn to be reasonable? "Log it as a strategic withdrawal pending further intelligence," he finally said. "Note that this system is defended by apex predators operating outside standard tactical parameters." As the Bloodfang turned away from Earth's blue marble, Rask allowed himself one final look at the planet that had redefined his understanding of what it meant to be a predator. Down there, a human was probably explaining to a honey badger that they had just won a war by being too unreasonable to lose. The Vorthak Empire would find other worlds to conquer, other species to intimidate into submission, but they would never again assume that superior technology and overwhelming force were enough to guarantee victory. Some predators, they had learned, were dangerous, not because they were strong, but because they had convinced everything else around them to be strong together. And some friendships were more terrifying than any weapon the universe had ever devised.